Foxes appear in literature and legend across the world. Look at Brer Fox in the American South. And in Rebel Folklore, I discuss the Jiuwei Hu of China, or nine-tailed fox, who drains men of their life force. Korea's kumiho is a similar spirit, while Japan has the supernatural fox spirit, the kitsune. Scholar Al-Biruni, magician Cornelius Agrippa, and astrologer William Lilly all put the fox under Mercury's rulership. Mercury is obviously the trickster of the Roman gods and represents communication, cleverness, speed, and resourcefulness, all qualities traditionally associated with the fox. It probably explains why dreaming of foxes meant you should beware of treachery and thieves. I do have an exclusive article about foxes for patrons on the lowest tier, which I have made available for sale if you'd like to read some additional fox folklore. But as it is, it seems that foxes also appear in folktales and literature, so I managed to write an entire new episode that didn't involve the lore from the article. So let's go and find out how foxes appear in folktales and literature in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host, Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. We are concluding our Folklore of Woodland Mammals theme this week with the fox. And as I said in the introduction, I do have an exclusive article about foxes in folklore, specifically for Patreon supporters. The link is below. I have made it available for sale for like £1, because obviously I wanted to honour the fact that patrons have paid for access, so therefore it wouldn't be really fair to make it available for free. But I did then go off and find all this additional stuff about how foxes appear in sort of fables and folktales and also literature as well, which I thought was quite an interesting way of looking at foxes instead of the folk remedies and so on that we've looked at with the other three animals. So hopefully you'll enjoy this. I can already tell you next month we're going to be having a look at the folklore and legends of buildings with a really fearsome reputation that has actually outlasted the building itself. So we will be looking at Bedlam because someone did request that after the Walbrook episode. We'll be having a look at Newgate Prison, mostly because I want to talk about Jack Sheppard. And we will also be looking at the Amityville house as well, because I know a lot of people enjoyed the Poltergeist episode. So I thought we'll actually have a look at some of the legends and whatnot that have accrued around the Amityville house. Now, technically speaking, it is still standing. It just has been renumbered. We will be having a look at how that has passed into a slightly different form of existence, as it were, through the likes of fiction and imagination and all that kind of thing as well. So that's what's coming up in October, which I thought would make a good theme for Halloween month. But we are going to crack on with foxes, and I'm going to start off with The Fox and the Goose. And this particular English folk song was collected in the 20th century, although scholars can trace its composition to at least the 15th century. The manuscript containing the first version was only published in 1952, so before that people assumed it was a late 18th century song at most. The act of writing it down is dated to between 1474 and 1525, although George Perkins suggests the oral version is likely to be far older. Because of the fact it started out oral and then was finally written down, there are also a lot of variations in the recorded versions, and obviously there are 400 years in between its oral version and the published one. So Perkins then gives a version that is closest to a hypothetical original, which is largely a combination of versions from both England and the United States. So it's difficult to find the version of this particular song, but this is the closest that we've got. So in The Fox and the Goose, the fox goes out one night in the winter and prays to the moon to provide plenty of light. Eventually, he reaches a farmer's yard that's full of ducks and geese. The fox warns them that the best of them will grease his beard and grabs a grey goose and a duck. The farmer's wife hears the commotion and sticks her head out of the window and cries out to her husband that the fox has killed the grey goose. Her husband goes to the top of the hill and blows his horn, and the fox then tells him to blow on while he heads home. The fox is quite arrogant, you see. Sure enough, the fox reaches his den where he finds his mate and 9 or 10 cubs. The cubs congratulate him on his hunting success, and they then set about enjoying the goose. No one mentions the ducks that he carried on his back, but presumably they enjoyed that as well. Quite how he kept it on his back, again, is never really discussed, but this is the joys of folk songs. So Walter Scott actually recorded a version in 1826 in which the fox was referred to as the Todd, which is another folk name for foxes. And the version provided by Perkins names the fox Reynard, although he does note this name doesn't appear in other versions. One version includes a stanza in which the fox hurries away after hearing hounds, which could explain why the farmer blows the horn on the hill. And another version actually sees the farmer shoot the fox for the theft of the birds, so it doesn't always end very well for the fox. Perkins noted that nursery rhyme books often included the fox and the goose, but because they didn't include any music to accompany the lyrics, this turned the song into more of a poem, which then allowed it to appear in books of children's poetry. Either way, it is a surprisingly simplistic song, or poem, whichever way you look at it, focused on the hunting prowess of the fox and its perceived tendency to steal livestock. It does appeal less to the image of the fox as a trickster because the fox just walks into the yard without needing to use any cunning, and instead it's largely portrayed as a farmyard pest instead. I think we can also see the seeds of stories like Fantastic Mr. Fox in this one, with the idea of a fox specifically stealing livestock from farmers. We can't necessarily say that there's a link between the two, but I think you can assume that there must be one at some point. But what is interesting is the use of the name Reynard, and I wanted to explore that bit a bit further, because Reynard is the trickster fox. And while some attribute tales about him to Aesop, which we will have a look at next, we should really look at the Roman de Reynard from the late 12th century. Now that story originally came from the Netherlands, although both France and Germany also lay claim to it, but William Caxton brought it to a wider audience with an English translation, Reynard the Fox, in 1481. Now Reynard the Fox lives in a kingdom populated by other animals. He regularly commits unpleasant acts against other creatures, but he continually evades punishment. These different characters constantly accuse him of doing things, but then he frustrates them with his ability to lie and bend language in his favour. And Charles C. Misch described Reynard as displaying, and I quote, cynical contempt for order and authority, end quote. So the general idea behind it is King Noble the Lion commands his subjects to attend his court. Reynard fails to appear since several of the animals he has wronged will be there, so Isegrim the wolf, Chanticleer the rooster and Curtis the little hound all lodge complaints against him. King Noble sends out emissaries to bring Reynard to court, and it is only the third emissary, Grimbart the Brock, who succeeds. The weight of complaints against Reynard is such that King Noble actually orders his execution. Yet Reynard pretends to have discovered a plot against the king and wins a reprieve. When King Noble realises it's all a ruse, Reynard then wins his freedom again by claiming he has magical gifts for the king. Irritated by Reynard's ability to avoid the noose, Isegrim challenges Reynard to combat. He hopes to finally bring Reynard to justice, but the fox cheats again and wins. King Noble pardons him and Reynard emerges as the king's greatest subject. Now this might sound like a bit of an odd story to have become so popular, given it essentially invites people to injure their neighbours because they can get away with it. But Reynard also included lengthy morals in each chapter which explain why Reynard is ultimately in the wrong. Now it is worth noting that these morals only appear in the 1620 edition, published during the reign of King James I of England and VI of Scotland, and are missing from earlier editions, and that's likely an attempt to caution people against challenging authority. Meanwhile, earlier editions probably lack the morals because I would imagine people like the idea of challenging authority and so on. And perhaps earlier monarchs felt a little bit more secure than James, who knows. But two further sequels followed, although the writer had to focus on Reynard's son in the second sequel because they killed off Reynard himself in the first. But why is Reynard a fox? Well, likely due to the association between foxes and cunning. Like other tricksters, Reynard relies on his wit and guile to defeat his opponents. And yes, if you are wondering, the 1973 Disney version of Robin Hood was partially based on Reynard the Fox. While Reynard is incredibly violent and therefore not really necessarily a good subject for a Disney film, Disney then combined parts of the story, such as the talking animals, with the idea of Robin Hood standing up to the so-called illegitimate ruler of England. It is interesting to see how Reynard is then preserved in movie history essentially, but then also aligned with a character like Robin, who, let's be honest, is also very much portrayed as a bit of a trickster, a character who challenges authority, although when we look at Robin by comparison, he's usually portrayed as being a trickster to do the right thing for people and for the community rather than himself. So there is a bit of a difference in motivation there. So it's quite interesting seeing them both brought together in the form of the Disney fox in Robin Hood. Our final fox folktale, and try saying that quickly, is The Fox, the Wolf and the Horse from the fables of Aesop, which I did say would come back to, which was later popularised by Jean de La Fontaine. In this story, a fox and a wolf are neighbours. The fox spots a horse in the meadow, although he's not quite sure what it is because he's never seen one before. He goes to the wolf to tell him about the new creature in the area. The wolf asks him what the creature looks like and asks to see a picture. The fox admits he can't paint, or he would paint him a picture of the animal. So in lieu of an image, he asks if the wolf wants to come with him to see it, because after all, the animal might be prey for them. When they reach the meadow, the horse takes an immediate dislike to them, recognising them as threats. He turns to gallop away to another part of the meadow where he can graze in peace. The fox calls out and asks him what his name is. The horse pauses and sees the opportunity before him. So he tells them that they can read his name for themselves because it's engraved on his horseshoes. The fox apologises and explains that his parents never taught him to read, so alas, he can't read the horseshoes. But he further explains that the wolf taught at college and could read it no matter what language it was in. Very susceptible to flattery, the wolf approaches the horse to inspect the horseshoe. We don't know if the wolf actually can read or if he's just playing along because he wants to appear intelligent. It's difficult to know, but he loses 4 teeth when the horse lashes out with a hoof, which does indeed give him a closer look at the shoe, but also knocks out the wolf. This tale ends with a moral by the fox, who tells the wolf that he'd learned a lesson from, and I quote, a fox of wit, end quote, that the wise mistrust all unknown things. Here the story relies on the cunning of the fox, who, being a trickster, also recognises the trick about to be played by the horse. And it's an interesting story in terms of the horse's quick thinking, but even more so for the way it portrays the wolf as gullible and easy to flatter, while the fox is clever enough to spot the ruse. And again, we can sort of see that in the way the fox as Robin Hood and the wolf as the Sheriff of Nottingham play out, again, in the Disney version of Robin Hood. But in the Aesop story, it is unclear if the fox has actually realised all of this at the point he spots the horse in the first place, or if it just comes to him as he's going along and he realises what the horse has said to the pair of them. But either way, he certainly leaves the wolf to take the fall. That in and of itself would be quite interesting, but I did actually find a similar story that was collected by J.F. Campbell from stableboy John McKinnon in Skye in the 19th century. And in this version, a horse is tied up outside a blacksmith's house. 2 foxes come along and spot that the horse has 1 golden shoe. The bigger of the foxes goes to read what name is written on the shoe, but the horse lashes out and kicks the fox in the head and kills him. It seems strange to see a fox bested so easily, and the trickster element is removed entirely from that segment. However, that's the second part of the story, not the beginning part, and I've had to tell them the wrong way around, sort of, to connect it in with the Aesop fable. But before they arrive at the blacksmith's house, the 2 foxes have tricked a man out of his catch of fish. So in this earlier part of the tale, the foxes spot a man carrying a creel of herrings. So the larger fox runs on ahead and lies in the road playing dead. When the man then finds him, he picks up what he thinks is the corpse of a fine animal and throws him into the creel. So when the man then keeps walking along the road, the large fox throws the herrings out of the creel down to the smaller fox that's following. The big fox then leaps out once he's emptied the creel, and the 2 of them run off with all the herrings. Then we get the episode at the blacksmith's, and once the horse has dashed out the brains of the big fox, the smaller one thus has the haul of herrings all to himself. And as he said, and I quote, "No scholar me, nor wish I to be," end quote. So here, his not being able to read actually saved him from his companion's fate. So being educated obviously is not the same as being intelligent, and while the big fox has the cunning idea to steal the herrings, it's the little fox who's left to enjoy them because he doesn't overreach himself. So in some ways, he's not a trickster because he tricks anyone out of anything, because obviously that is the large fox's idea, but he recognises when to act and when not to act, and that obviously then goes on to help him. So I thought it was really interesting to see how that part of the Aesop's fable had then more or less made its way into Highland folklore as well. But ultimately, why are foxes tricksters in folk tales? Pelagio Benavides suggests that the fox, like other trickster animals like the spider, crow or hyena, ends up in this role across cultures for a specific reason. These animals occupy a liminal space between, and I quote, the cultural space and the wilderness, end quote. And foxes being nocturnal also grants them an outsider status because obviously they're up and about when everybody else is asleep. Foxes appearing in urban areas at dusk make them especially out of their place. And I'm sure I've mentioned before how things like dawn and dusk are these so-called liminal times, where they're the transition point between one state and another. So dusk isn't during the day and it isn't at night, it's that point in between. So foxes then become associated with that, and because they can live in the woodland or they can live in an urban area, again, it makes them these liminal creatures. And that then gives them this outsider status, which allows them to play against the status quo because they aren't necessarily considered to be part of it, if that makes sense. But even though these animals are perceived negatively, they do then become useful in stories because they provide tales that can be discussed or thought about. So in essence, their stories are teaching tools. And even when we look at the stories in East Asia in which fox spirits may appear as alluring women, they still caution people not to be deceived by appearances. And I think when we look at the foxes in these particular stories, there is definitely that sense that they can bend language to suit what they want, or they are just very good at what they do. So that combination of cunning, ability, and intelligence obviously then leads them into this position where they're perceived negatively, even though they are actually really delightful, enchanting animals. We have a fox that actually visits my garden occasionally, and it's always such a pleasure to see the fox pop up on the trail camera, just to know that it's knocking about, really. So I quite like having an urban fox in the area, but there we go. I just think that they're really cool animals. But what I'd like to know is, what do you make of foxes in folktales? Do you like foxes at all? I know some people do see them as pests, but again, I always caution people who think that to think, is it possible that they might view humans as pests? Because that is obviously a possibility as well. So just something to think about. As I say, if you are interested in further fox folklore, so things like superstitions and stuff like that, then as I say, there is that exclusive article available on Patreon if you'd like to get access to that. Obviously, if you sign up to become a patron, you get an exclusive article every month, and you also help to fund the production of these episodes every week. So you are at least contributing to the different costs required in making a podcast, which a lot of people maybe don't know, but it does include really boring stuff like website hosting, but then it's also like your time and researching and recording and editing and all that kind of jazz as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed all this. I hope you also enjoyed the episode of Fabulous Folklore Presents that I put out, in which I chatted to the absolutely delightful Natalie Lawrence about monsters, which was a really cool conversation. And her book, Enchanting Creatures, is also definitely worth picking up. So I hope you enjoyed that earlier in the week. And I hope you're also looking forward to the, not quite folklore, but maybe the legends of buildings whose face and reputation actually outlasted the building itself. And we are starting with Bedlam. So I hope you enjoy that as well. But anyway, I hope you have a marvellous week ahead, and I will see you soon. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.